The uncompensated harms argument for antinatalism. Introduction. There is an overlooked yet quite interesting argument for the view that coming into existence is bad and that procreation is morally wrong. Of course, I won't say anything that hasn't already been said, but the argument has a nice spin, so I would like to make it more visible and present it clearly. In the notes you can find some alternative ways of stating the general argument. This entire essay is based on an excellent paper by Byron Simmons entitled "1,000 Pleasures Are Not Worth a Single Pain: The Compensation Argument for Schopenhauer's Pessimism." The paper defends the pessimistic premise in much more detail. I'll provide a link to it and I highly recommend reading it. Moral intuitions and premises. For the argument to work, we have to start with some intuitions. In the present case, these would be 1.1. An event with an uncompensated harm is bad. 1.2. It is forbidden to impose harm that is not compensated by good. I take the intuitions to be uncontroversial and generally accepted. Let's synthesize and slightly reformulate them into a no harmful condition premise. 1. It is wrong to create a condition where someone is being harmed without being compensated. Next, we have a pessimistic premise. 2. Every life contains uncompensated harms. The anthropocentric argument. We will get back to the above premise later. For now, let's try to formulate the actual argument. It could look like this. P11. It is wrong to create a condition where someone is being harmed without being compensated. P21. Bringing someone into existence creates a condition where someone is being harmed without being compensated. C1. Therefore, it's wrong to bring anyone into existence. In the above argument, P1 is our no harmful condition premise based on an uncontroversial moral intuitions, and P2 comes directly from our pessimistic premise. The conclusion naturally follows. The pessimistic premise. Let's look at the pessimistic premise. What does it mean for X to compensate for Y? Compensation means offsetting or lessening of one thing by means of another. The good can only compensate the bad when it happens in the same subject, call it the subject condition. It happens at the same time, call it the time condition. The reason for the subject condition is that no matter how much good other subjects experience, it absolutely doesn't matter to the one who suffers. The suffering of that one individual is not lessened even an iota by the joy experienced by others. This is so because the joy of strangers doesn't penetrate the sufferer through osmosis or anything like that. The good of the joyful is locked in the joyful, and the suffering of the miserable is sealed in the miserable. The miserable doesn't feel the happiness of the joyful, hence their good doesn't compensate for his harm. The reason for the time condition is that the current suffering is in no way diminished by the future joy. One doesn't even know the future. And the future joy cannot use a time machine to step into the present moment to appear in the immediate experience of the miserable to push out the harm or caress the miserable person. We all are miserable sometimes. Even if later we feel better because of this, that future state doesn't compensate for the past harm. The future good is just another moment of experience. Also, we know that the suffering of people in war zones or in impoverished countries is not lessened by the joy of Hollywood stars and billionaires in affluent countries. We have good reasons to accept both the subject condition and the time condition for compensation. When we seriously consider these two conditions, we'll quickly see that most harms we experience, if not all of them, are uncompensated. Strong desires have an inherent aspect of unpleasantness and frustration. Frustrated desires and preferences are even more immediate examples. No one is free from bodily pains and discomforts. We fail to attain our goals. When we do attain them, we often feel the joy to be underwhelming. We lose the things we cherish and the people we love. We get bored. We get scared, sad. We get frail, sickly, and we go through a horrible process of dying. All of these are events where we experience harm and not much else. And because of the two conditions just mentioned, these events are all cases of uncompensated harms. Every life contains uncompensated harms. A note on the no harmful condition premise. We know from experience that life is full of moments where we feel miserable. Hence, every life contains harms, and every life contains uncompensated harms. If we can see at least some reason in the above, then we already see that procreation leads to the creation of a situation where there is someone new who will live a life containing uncompensated harms. And because we agree with the uncontroversial claim that creating such situations is wrong, we are led to thinking that bringing new people into the world is also wrong. Potential objections. There certainly are a number of potential objections one could levy upon the argument we presented so far. Probably the most common one would be, "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger." According to this objection, pain allows us to learn, to grow, to become wise and good. Because we go through hardship, we become better people. A bad thing may lead to very good consequences that are more intense or last longer or are more important. In response, we can say that the future state, good consequences, gain strength or virtue, is simply another moment of life, another experience. And this future state doesn't erase the experienced past, as it cannot go into the past. The only thing it can change is our memory of it. We can also reframe the past event, but again, this is something that occurs at another time, so at the original past moment, we are not affected by any future goods we would later gain from it. Someone could also object that even though there are some events where harms are not compensated, there still are lives that are overall positive. This counter assumes a utilitarian framework where one could calculate the bads and the goods and come up with a final sum that would say whether a life was on the whole positive or negative. However, life doesn't work like that. This is not the case in our subjective experience nor in our brains. Each moment of experience is unique. Even if one could provide an abstract result of someone's entire life, the resulting sum would not affect a particular moment of experience. Everything we said about the time condition we could apply to this counter. The bad event in question is not less bad, even if it occurs in the best of lives. The third objection would say that we already do many things that are harmful in the short term, but from which we benefit in the long term. We go to the dentist and we suffer for a while, but the upshot of that is less suffering in the future. We vaccinate little children who don't like needles, but because of this, they will not suffer from some disease later in life. This is supposed to put into question our no harmful condition premise. For this objection, we can provide two answers. First, in the dentist case, the person who goes to the dentist creates the condition for suffering for herself, so it's not a moral issue at all, even if the harm is not compensated. Second, we can agree that painful vaccination is an example of an uncompensated harm, but this results from the child being brought into existence. So this harmful event is yet another uncompensated harm that stems directly from the act of procreation, which is the point of the argument. We can look at the horrible situation of people stranded on a lifeboat who have to fight for existence and judge them morally. But here we're interested in more fundamental things. How do we evaluate existence itself? What led to these people being in this situation in the first place? We judge existence negatively as it contains uncompensated harms. What created the morally impossible situation was procreation. The general argument. Previously, we looked at an anthropocentric version of the argument as we used moral language. We said that it was wrong to procreate. That version was clear and easy to understand, but it has a serious limitation. It applies to just one species of animals. Let's try to reformulate the argument such that it secures the antinatalist view but applies to all sentient subjects, to all animals. The general argument would look like this. P12. If a subject experiences uncompensated harms, it is bad for the subject to come into existence. P22. Every subject experiences uncompensated harms. C2. Therefore, it is bad for every subject to come into existence. This argument applies to all sentient beings, and because of this, it has no explicit moral prescriptions. One additional upshot of that is that some objections may not be applicable anymore. Alright, so that's it. This was an underappreciated argument for antinatalism, but one that deserves more attention. I hope you got something out of it.